Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar where we're going to be discussing how to gain a competitive edge by mastering candidate outreach. This webinar will run for about 30 minutes and we'll leave some time at the end for questions. So please send through your questions in the chat box as and when they pop up while we're talking, and then we'll run through them at the end. So let's start by getting acquainted. I'm Evie. I'm a client lead at Talentful based in San Francisco. I recently moved over from London, where I've spent most of my career. So I've been with Talentful for 4 years and I've partnered with 8 clients in that time. I'm currently with Google's Moonshot Factory X. The projects I've worked on have ranged from early stage tech startups like Attest, where we were scaling fast and building out a recruiting infrastructure, helping a venture-backed games company like Gram Games open up a new HQ in London and building that studio from scratch, to larger tech enterprises like Google DeepMind, where I was building out a sourcing function and managing a team of sourcers. Historically, I've been a generalist, recruiting everything from commercial to marketing, design, and engineering, but over the past few years, I've been focused on recruiting in the deep tech space. I've got a personal interest in language and linguistics. A long time ago, I did an English degree, so I really enjoy applying that interest in my candidate outreach. And Sophie.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Sophie Shanahoff. I'm a talent partner here with Talentful. I joined the company back in January when we first kicked off our SF office here. So I'm also located in San Francisco. In my time here, I've been on 2 clients. So I started off on a client called Contentful, which was a scale-up tech company. And now I'm currently on a client called Standage Management, which is a fund administrator. So traditionally speaking, I've been more on the G&A side of things, hiring for roles like sales and marketing and whatnot. And then similar to Evie's interest in English and writing, I have a strong passion for psychology. So I'm really interested in kind of the psychology behind, what makes people more interested in responding to a message and what really catches their attention.
And now a brief introduction to Talentful. So we're a team of talent experts helping build the companies changing the world. We do that through end-to-end recruitment delivery, our culture matching platform Insightful, and our employer branding studio. Our consultants embed into high growth companies on a flexible basis and create outstanding recruitment processes and experience. We're all over the place now. You can find Talentful in London, Berlin, and now San Francisco, working with seed-backed tech startups through to household names like Google and King. So the last webinar that we hosted was on finding great talent, so sourcing talent. For those of you who weren't there, it's not easy. I believe that we should be investing as much time and energy into making that first touch point with a candidate impactful and engaging as we do in sourcing them. I think of a reach out message as a campaign. Just as marketers sell products and services to consumers, we're selling companies to prospective employees. So here is our agenda for the webinar. Sophie's going to start with taking us through your candidate engagement toolbox. So different add-ons and tools that you can use. She's going to talk through some personalization and how to do that. And then I'm going to zoom in on language, tone, and structure of your reach outs. And then we're going to talk through some creative ideas as well.
Great, so we'll kick things off by discussing some tools for you to use to help increase candidate engagement. So in order to master candidate outreach, the first most important thing is being able to get a hold of the candidate, right? So while sending LinkedIn emails is the most common way to reach out to candidates for recruiters, the average prospect actually receives 120 emails in a day, which means there's a strong likelihood that those emails are going to get lost in the shuffle of their, packed inbox. So this is why it's so important for every recruiter to have a candidate engagement toolbox under their belt. So, getting a response from a candidate, as we know, can sometimes be the hardest part of recruiting. So there are a few tips and tricks to getting the most responses possible. But firstly, let's talk about finding the right candidates. There are many sites, LinkedIn, GitHub, and Stack Overflow that can help find top talent for the roles you may be working on. And sometimes it can be overwhelming knowing where to look in the first place. So a great resource to search through all these channels at once and to find some hidden gems that may not appear otherwise is by using Recruiter X-Ray Search, which is just a website. So it's completely free. And basically this tool scours Google and the whole web to find candidates located across all different platforms, including LinkedIn, Dribbble, Zing, Stack Overflow, and Twitter. So it's basically an all-in-one search tool to help save you time and find great talent. Another great tool for tracking down candidate information is a handy website called truepeoplesearch.com, also completely free. As recruiters, we're basically top detectives, and so this tool allows you to be just that. With truepeoplesearch.com, you can find phone numbers, email addresses, and more simply through searching someone's name and city. So again, super easy to use and a completely free way to just find some more information about the candidates you're searching for. So getting a candidate's email and a phone number can be incredibly crucial. Again, because candidates receive so many emails on LinkedIn, shooting an email or a phone call their way can make a big difference in standing out. So there are some really great tools in addition to True People Search, like I mentioned, that can help find contact information for candidates that are hard to get a hold of. Some really easy Chrome plugins listed here that do just this, but not limited to just these as well. There's Lusha, Amazing Hiring, and Numeria. Both Lusha and Amazing Hiring do require subscriptions, but Numeria will allow a certain amount of free searches for those candidates that you've really been trying to track down for months. Another great tip is for when you do receive those emails, having a hiring manager reach out directly to the candidate. If the candidate's been hard to get a hold of, a personalized email from a VP or a director can go a long way instead of just another email from another recruiter.
Sophie, I have a question. Do you always recommend reaching out to candidates via a personal email or a phone call?
Yeah, that is a great question, Evie. When it comes to reaching out to candidates via email and phone number, it's really important to be cognizant of the type of audience you're working with. So, for example, if you're working on sales type roles, this can be a great method. Salespeople get tons of messages per day, so it's a great way to potentially stand out amongst a sea of recruiters. And additionally, salespeople are used to reaching out in this way as well. They do cold calls, they do emails, so they often really appreciate and respect the persistence and the grind. But on the other hand, there are a lot of other positions that might find this method too aggressive and it may scare them off. A lot of people don't necessarily want to be receiving calls from recruiters while they're at their current workplace. So make sure to take those factors of appropriateness into consideration before reaching out to candidates through these methods, definitely.
Yeah, I think from my experience with recruiting engineers, big stereotype, but often they're a bit more introverted. So sending them an email or a connection request first and making that touch point a bit lighter, I think is often a good approach.
Definitely. Really important to know your audience on that one.
Yeah.
If you do decide to contact candidates via email, though, there are some really handy tools to help you be most successful. So one is, again, just an easy Chrome plugin, completely free. It's called Boomerang for Gmail. And basically what Boomerang does is it allows you to schedule emails to be sent out at your time of choosing in the future. So it's a great way to set up an easy email cadence automatically. As we'll talk about in a little bit, follow-ups can be really key to successful outreach. And Boomerang allows you to easily set up those follow-ups for the candidates you really want to track down. It's also just a great way to stay in touch with candidates for the future and to set up any email campaigns with any updates about your business that you might have. Another great email tool is Yesware. This one is unfortunately not free. So if you do have the budget, it can be a great way to go after the right candidates. As recruiters, we so often are blindly reaching out to candidates, not really knowing what their interest level is. And with Yesware, you can see when someone has opened your email or not. So it allows you to know which candidates might be ignoring your message and which just, might have missed it and it got lost in the shuffle of all their other emails. So using this tool is a great way to know how to do a reach out based off of that information moving forward. So for example, if you know a candidate has opened your email but has not yet responded, you can address that in your follow-up message. Whereas if a candidate hasn't seen your last email, you may want to call out that you've already sent a message, but they may have missed it.
Yeah, I guess another thing that's useful about this is if you can see they haven't opened the message, maybe you go down a different channel and message them on LinkedIn or a different platform instead.
Exactly. Yeah, so when it comes to actually sending out the messages, personalization is really, really key to getting the candidate's attention. So we're going to talk about that a little next. First and foremost, it is so important to make it about them. Our job as recruiters is to do a lot of listening. We need to listen to our hiring managers when they tell us what they're looking for in a candidate. We need to listen to our candidates when they're telling us about themselves and about their aspirations. And we need to listen to our business to know where we can help shape our organizations for the better. So when we're reaching out to a candidate, it's so important to bring forward this idea of listening, even through emails and messages. So instead of sending a lengthy email detailing who you are, where you've come from, or what your business does, instead try sending an email about the candidate. So you can talk about, what stood out from their profile, why you think they may be a good fit for your company, and what you want to learn more about them. Obviously sending these messages takes more time because it is individualized. It also reaps greater rewards. I know personally, I've received a lot of messages from candidates back that have stated things like, "Thank you for actually reading my profile. Most recruiters don't do this," or "Thank you for actually reaching out about a role that fits my background." So showing an actual interest in the candidate as an individual rather than someone who can check something off your list allows them to see you as more of an individual as well, rather than just an extension of your company. And while, it can be easy to ignore a large company, it's a lot harder to ignore an individual because it becomes a lot more personal. And so the candidate will be more inclined to respond, even if they're not currently interested in speaking. And another piece to note is, if you have things in common with the candidate, don't be afraid to call those out in your messages. As humans, we all really crave a connection. And so if you see that you and a candidate have something in common, again, don't be afraid to call that out. It'll make them see you as more of a person and more individual. There are a lot of obvious things that you may have in common with someone, such as where they went to school, previous companies they've worked at, or organizations they're a part of. But you can also gather a lot of information about a candidate from the awards they've won, recommendations listed on their LinkedIn, and maybe any volunteer opportunities they've been a part of as well. For example, if someone has listed on their profile that they used to volunteer as a Little League coach, you might be able to assume that they're passionate about both baseball and or children. And if this is something that you have in common, bringing it up in your outreach is a great way to stand out and get a response. Just remember that there is a line between seeking connection and seeming creepy. So, while mentioning a candidate's alma mater is totally within normal, you probably want to stray away from specific personal details such as marital status or how many children they might have. But doing your research on your candidate to find out about them individually shows that you really value people's time and that you're not just reaching out aimlessly. And people want to work for companies that value their time. So while this research may take more time on your end, it increases the chances of a response. And even if the candidate does not currently want to discuss an open role, it's still a great way to catch their attention so that they're more likely to reach out in the future when they are looking. And then additionally to personalization, sending follow-up messages is a great way to increase response rates. So here we can just kind of see, some of the response rates based off how many messages have been sent. As previously discussed, candidates receive so many reach outs and messages per day, which is why persistence is key in upping your response rate. So follow-up messages are just a new opportunity to show that you're worth the candidate's time, which is why it's so important to continue to apply the same creativity and personalization as you do in your initial message and your follow-up. So while follow-ups are incredibly important, it's additionally as important to ensure that you are going about the follow-ups in the right way. Sending too many follow-ups or forgetting to continue to personalize them can make them really easy to ignore. It's important, not to follow up too soon and to follow up sincerely to ensure credibility and to increase chances of a response. So here, again, on this image, we can see that while one email has a 15% response rate, sending 2 emails increases your chance to 26%. From there, 31%, and from there, there's a 35% reply rate when you send 4 emails. So it really is a great way to show that you're sincere about your interest in the candidate. And another great way to just show that you are, respectful and professional in your follow-up is to give the candidate some sort of out. It's really easy to just say, if you're not interested, let me know and I'll stop reaching out. And a lot of the time, this just allows the candidate to feel comfortable letting you know that they're not currently interested, and it opens up the conversation for you and them for the future. It also shows that you're not trying to pester them and that you aren't reaching out just to reach out, but because you genuinely think they could be a good match for your role and for your company.
Great, so I'm now going to talk about language itself, so the language we're using when we're reaching out. As human beings, language and communication is one of our most powerful tools. In the context of candidate outreach, it's one of the ways that we can differentiate ourselves in a saturated market and really cut through the noise. So I'm going to talk first about good writing generally before I go into good writing in the context of candidate outreach. I think we can all benefit from becoming better writers. Improving your skills is just a matter of becoming conscious of the things that you can do to give your text more structure and make your copy crisp and readable with a conversational style. So give your writing structure. Before you start writing, make sure that you're clear on the concepts you're writing about. If your writing goal is to achieve a specific result, ask yourself what that result should be and work backwards from there. I always try to have clear purpose before I dive into any kind of writing. Try not to over-explain everything. If you've taken the time to organize your thoughts in advance, you should be able to keep things really simple. The idea is to give readers just enough to understand what you're communicating without overwhelming them with trivial details. If you find yourself getting into the weeds with more details than you need, look at the piece of information and ask whether it's essential to help your reader understand your message. If not, get rid of it. Tighten your writing. Try to eliminate the filler words and phrases. Although words such as just and very can sometimes add color or even meaning, most of the time they don't contribute anything at all. You can also do away with adverbs. These are descriptive words often ending in ly before verbs. They often mean some more weak word choices. So instead of ran really fast, you could write sprinted. Instead of extremely funny, hilarious would be more effective. And make your writing more conversational. So I'm going to go into more detail about this shortly. So try not to give into the urge of using that fancy new word that you just learned. There's a difference between having a rich vocabulary and dropping in an obscure word into your writing just to show off. Always try to keep your language simple and direct. The same goes with your sentences. Short, less complicated sentences are easier to read, so keep it simple. But do vary your sentence length so your writing has a nice flow. Another great piece of advice that we probably all learned in school is read it out loud. Reading your writing aloud can help you determine whether it flows smoothly. If it sounds choppy or clipped, add a few longer sentences to break it up. If you find yourself stumbling over parts, you've probably found an overly complex sentence or a grammatical error that needs rewriting. Edit your writing. Editing is just as important as the writing itself. In order to write your best, you need to be the reader of your work as well as its writer. And my last piece of advice is to proactively try to infuse your personality into your writing. So be yourself when you write. Which leads me nicely on to my next point. So I like to think, I think it's useful to think about the language we use in these two spaces, so email and Slack, or if you don't use Slack at your company, any kind of instant messaging platform. For some reason, when we join the professional world, it's like we're all given this invisible manual on how to communicate appropriately on email. We adopt these corporate cliches like, I'm sorry for the direct approach, or I just wanted to touch base. But how often would we actually say those things when meeting someone for the first time? A scientist named Dr. Mehrabian concluded in a study on nonverbal communication that an interpretation of a message is 7% verbal, 38% vocal, 55% visual. The conclusion was that 93% of communication is nonverbal in nature. Instant messaging has created this new breed of communication, which imitates the spoken word and nonverbal cues in many ways. We now communicate with emojis and gifs because they add a layer of meaning to the written word. They express our emotions, our personalities, and even our tone of voice. So my suggestion is that we should be using this kind of language when we're reaching out to candidates for the first time. So I would call this tone, and you'd be really surprised at the impact that just changing your tone can make. So losing the formal tone of your message and writing something in an accessible conversational style really humanizes us. You know, as Sophie was talking about, in a competitive market, top talent is inundated with messages every day. So it's really easy for candidates to think of us as robots, you know, spamming their inboxes. So doing this really reminds them that we're humans too. It cuts through the noise, differentiates us from the templates that fill their inboxes every day, and it helps us establish a relationship really early on. So here's some positive responses that I've had in the past when I've just changed up the style of my writing.
Evie, I'm so curious, what type of message did you send that gave that candidate a good laugh?
Yeah, so that was for a follow-up message where I think we've got an opportunity with follow-ups to add a bit of humor and be a bit tongue-in-cheek. So that one in particular referred to being abducted by aliens. So I won't give away too much. It's a secret.
Gonna have to steal that template from you later.
Oh, and great messages start with great subject lines. Up to 35% of recipients will only open your message if the subject line resonates with them. So contrary to popular opinion, I think the goal of a subject line isn't to provide information or indicate the contents of the message. It's to get the recipient to open the message. It's about sparking curiosity. And this is where we're thinking, as recruiters, we're thinking a bit more like marketers. And so this is where you can really experiment. So use humor, use puns. I often use emojis as I think they really draw the eye. You can use a website called Emojipedia where you can copy and paste emojis and put them into subject lines. And how to structure an effective message. So I think brevity is one of the keys to a successful reach out message. The average reader spends between 15 to 20 seconds scanning your message. So you need to keep it short and sweet. What is it that you want the candidate to know? What about your company or the role will pique their interest? If you're struggling to cut it down, try a few of these things. So get rid of the personal introduction. So as Sophie mentioned, it's not about you, it's about them. Delete the generic flattery. Again, to refer back to Sophie's points, personalization really is key. And I think candidates know when it's just a kind of generic copy and paste. And get to the point quickly. So really utilize your first paragraph wisely. I always put the personalization right at the top so they know that this isn't a template and I'm really reaching out to them. Piloting your reach out. So I mentioned earlier that we should view our outreach messages almost as marketing campaigns. And a good marketer wouldn't design a campaign without doing some user or market research first. Luckily for us, our user per se are often under the same roof. So if you're recruiting, for example, for your engineering team, draft up a message and ask them for feedback. I always ask them to be really brutal. I'd ask if the message that they receive from recruiters, what do they like, what do they don't like, what would make them answer the message, and if they've received good messages, then send them on to me as well. Stack Overflow's developer survey states that the most important factor for engineers choosing a new role is the technology they'd be using. And feedback from my engineer colleagues in the past is often the same. So ask them what is exciting about the tech they're using at your company. The best reach outs that I've used in the past have been a collaborative effort between myself and someone who's actually doing the role at the company. So here's an example of one that I've put together in the past where I did just that. So I have personalization at the top, I get to the point really quickly. And based on, what I learned from Stack Overflow, I focus on the tech first. And I actually got an engineer to write this for me. I then talked a bit about the company culture and what that means and what that would mean to them, and then a very non-pushy call to action at the end. And as you can see, the style of this is a bit unique. I use bullet points instead of paragraphs, and I actually imitated the style that the engineers communicated with each other on Slack. So I thought it was quite dynamic, but it's a good idea to really just A/B test different styles, different types of reach outs. And thinking outside the box. Language isn't the only way for us to stand out in a competitive market, and you can really get creative. Use your product as a recruiting tool. Spotify has a fine example of this. In 2016, a recruiter garnered attention by approaching software developers with a custom-made playlist. When opened, the title of each track formed an invitation to join the band and apply for an open development role. And of course, Google, all the way back in 2004, Google purchased a handful of advertising billboards in well-known technology hubs like Silicon Valley and Harvard Square. The billboards contained a single difficult math puzzle. It was find the first 10-digit prime found in consecutive digits of E. someone could put in the chat if they managed to solve that one. And any passerby capable of solving the cryptic clue were directed to a dedicated website and a second challenging puzzle. Complete that puzzle, and the successful problem solvers were asked to submit their resumes to the company's recruiting team with the confidence bolstering quote, "What we're looking for is the best engineers in the world, and here you are." So reading about this, I was inspired to do something kind of unique. I asked one of my engineer colleagues to write the subject line in code, in the coding language that we were recruiting for. So yeah, I hope this gives you some inspiration too. And so that's the end of our webinar content. So we'd love to open this up for questions. If anyone's got any, you can send through the chat now. Cool, so I can see a question come through here. Do you think a conversational or playful tone is always appropriate, say for senior level roles? So I would say a conversational tone is always appropriate. You know, I do think the style of language can always be approachable and conversational. Maybe the playful tone. So you know, Sophie asked about my follow-up that was quite humorous. Sometimes they might not be as appropriate. Say if it's, you know, a C-suite or a very senior role. I think, you know, it's a case of really gauging who your audience is and what might be relevant or interesting to them. It also depends on what client you're working with as well. So I've worked with games companies in the past, and I think that gave me a lot of freedom to be really playful with how I reach out to people. Whereas if you're working for a research company, you know, you might want to keep it a little bit more serious. So it's a case of really figuring out what your product is and who you're selling to.
Yeah, it looks like another question coming through. If you're sourcing at volume, how do you have time to really personalize each one? Is there any way of personalizing quickly? I would say definitely yes. When it comes down to it, a lot of people have a lot of things in common. And so it's actually what I like to do is create templates that are personalized and have, you know, A, B, C, D templates that then when I do come across a candidate and they match that certain template, I'm able to send that out to them. So, you know, generally speaking, a lot of candidates are going to fit into one of those templates. If there is someone who doesn't, that message might take a little bit more time, but you can still save a lot of time by having those pre-generated templates. Just again, you know, keeping in mind that you're putting personalized stuff on them that might fit multiple candidates, and also keeping Evie's points in mind of keeping them conversational and, you know, playful to a degree. I think that in itself seems more personalized.
Is there anything you would really avoid with your reach outs? I would say grammatical errors or errors in general, particularly like with what Sophie was just talking about with templates. Like we all use templates, and it's absolutely fine to use templates. It's how we're efficient with our work. But having a close attention to detail. So I've received messages in the past that haven't had my name in them and things like that. I think sloppy work like that is really what we should be avoiding. So you know, proofing your message before you send it. You know, I know we're all trying to work fast and you know, hit a certain volume of outreach. But yeah, I mean, a tool that's really useful in terms of grammar and language is Grammarly. It's one that I've used for a long time, and it's like spell check, but even more so. So it checks some of your language and your tone as well. So you can get a free version of that as an add-on that will actually do that in LinkedIn emails as well. So I would say, Sophie, do you think there's anything else that you would avoid?
Yeah, I was going to say just that it sounds so simple, but using the candidate's correct name, I know, you know, when you're going through so many messages and sending them all out at once, it's sometimes easy to get that jumbled, and that is something that is going to get you rejected real fast. So just always make sure if you're going to check anything, check that you're using the right name.
Yeah. And I would also probably avoid big blocks of text, it's a bit harder to read. So kind of like try to space it out a little bit, and as I mentioned, kind of brevity. So keeping it kind of short and sweet.
Yeah, I think shorter is always better. Let's see. How do you nurture candidate relationships over time for future roles, not just current roles? So one great tool that I talked about in this, that Boomerang tool, is a great way to just set up email cadences with any candidates that you have in your pipeline, whether they've applied to roles in the past that didn't work out or you've reached out to them and they weren't interested. Great way to keep them up to date on what's going on in your business. I think this is also an okay time where you can send out a really short, maybe not as personalized message if you're trying to build a pipeline. But if you're doing that, it needs to be because you're inviting the candidate to some sort of event or some sort of happy hour or something where they can learn more about the business. But I think in those circumstances, it's okay to sometimes send out like a mass email inviting candidates to learn more. And that's a great way to build a pipeline and keep them engaged over time, just knowing that, hey, we're not necessarily looking for a role for you right now, but we just want to engage you with our brand and see if it's something you'd be interested in.
Yeah, and you can certainly utilize your ATS as well. So I've used Greenhouse in the past, and they've got a good CRM function and like a prospecting function. So sometimes candidates will apply and say, this company sounds really interesting, I'm just not looking to leave right now. And it's easy to just, when you're trying to fill a role quickly, to just be like, okay, move on to the next one. But I think it's good to put that candidate into your talent pool. So as Sophie mentions, put them somewhere where you can then contact them and engage them for events or news, blogs, things like that. So you're really like nurturing a talent pool. So do you ever use Crystal Knows as a tool, for example, to decide a keyword limit per message, per candidate, or do you have a number of words you keep yourself to each message? So always 50 per outreach every time. For me personally, I don't have a kind of rigid limit that I set, because I think it really depends on the candidate you're reaching out to, how much detail you go into in terms of the personalization. For more senior roles, I spend a lot more time talking about their profile and referring to a YouTube video of them, a TED Talks, things like that. So I won't limit myself to any particular number. I think once it gets over like 100 characters, I might start going in and editing. I think, what I was referring to when I started talking about language was the act of editing. So every template that I start to craft, I'll almost go away from it, come back to it, and say, like, what can I delete? What's not adding value to this message, and go through and delete. So I feel like that's a good process to take with every reach out you do, is cut things out. So write it all out and then edit. What do you think, Sophie?
Yeah, I agree. I think write everything out that you want to say and then see what you can cut out, see what you can shorten. But you want to make sure that you're getting all the information that is necessary on there. But I think using, the tips that Evie talked about before about determining what's necessary is a good way to make sure that you're not sending too long of a message here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you also, if you're designing a campaign and it's going to have multiple, multiple touch points, you don't want to give all your information away in the first reach out. Looking at the data that Sophie went through, it's by the third or the fourth message that people tend to reply. So you want to save some of those interesting things for following messages as well. So I know it can be tempting to put all of the great stuff in the first message, but save yourself some ammo for other messages as well.
Definitely.
Okay, well, I think we don't have any more questions. So thank you, everyone.
Yeah, so that concludes the webinar. I hope you all were able to gain some value from it, and hopefully we'll be able to implement some of these strategies for yourselves. We would love, your support beyond today. You can find us at talentful.com if you'd like to find out more about our services. You can also register for more webinars like this one. We'll be running them every couple of weeks, so feel free to visit talentful.com/webinars to see all of our upcoming live and on-demand recorded webinars. And if you'd like to chat more about any of this at all, please feel free to reach out to us via email or on LinkedIn.